Alright, and welcome back to the TheNosePlays Endless Space 2. Today, as formerly alluded to, I'm going to be doing a different kind of video. This is not going to be live gameplay, although we're going to revisit the end of my Riftborn game. We had a few places to talk about some things. But today's video is the first of a series of videos that I want to do for Endless Space 2 at this time, because it's fairly obvious that we're basically near the end of life for this game. There's not going to be any more big DLC, I don't believe. There will be very few minor bug fixes and patches that come out, as they just did another big bug pass of the game. And so as of the 6th of October 2020, I'm going to be reviewing each faction that I'm familiar with and giving you an outline of my tips for that faction, my insights for that faction, and my ideas for how to get the most out of each faction that you can then add to your own gameplay and see if they work for you. I'm in no way suggesting that this is the optimal way to win the game with each of these factions. These are just my insights into the synergies that I see when I play. And I haven't played a ton of Riftborn, but there were some very obvious things that stuck out after a couple of games with them. And so I feel like I'm on track to basically have a very solid strategy wrapped up for you guys. So, before we get to that, I just wanted to point out that there are some cool things you can do in Amplitude's games. Most of Amplitude's games have a way to completely disable the UI, which I've done in this view right here. This is the Riftborn's home planet of Vanguard, and one of the things that makes this game so fun to play is sort of the serene nature of the game, and the visuals that you get are just really, really cool. And if you're ever interested in taking some amazing screenshots of this game at any point, particularly for like wallpapers or even for icons for your YouTube videos in the future, in this game, if you press Shift F10, you can enable and disable the UI. And this is available at any point in the game, including the very, very beginning of the game at the loading screen. You can disable and enable the UI at the loading screen, and those really cool cinematic shots with like the fleet hovering over the homeworld make for some great background wallpaper shots. So just wanted to point that out because I think it's really cool. So we're at almost turn 100 in this game, and before we get to the late game stuff, let's zoom out here and jump over to this screen, and let's talk a little bit about why these guys are so good at a few things. So one of the reasons that we were able to get such a good start and have such great planets is my decision to rapidly expand with the Riftborn. The Riftborn, in my opinion, are one of the factions in the game that have the ability to go very, very wide with almost no penalty. There aren't many factions that can do this, and the only real penalty that you even have in the game is this expansion disapproval. This is really the only thing that you have to worry about when playing Riftborn and going wide. And you can see we're currently 4 systems above our limit of 9, and we're still able to hold devoted through a bevy of approval buildings and approval laws and other things in the game. Even if we were to lose devoted and drop to a lower tier of happiness, it wouldn't be that detrimental. And in fact, I think you could go as far as pushing all the way to a neutral status, which means you could basically run at 40% approval, somewhere around 45% approval. And you can see The systems that we do have running at 40-45% approval are content. Now these are systems that were recently captured in most cases, so they have a huge approval penalty as they're slowly transitioning to life under Riftborn rule. But as long as you have content, it looks like this one's at content all the way down to 30%. As long as you're running your systems at content, I think it's probably okay to continue to expand. Why can they do this? What allows them to do this that prevents all the other factions from doing it? Well, it's one little interesting adaptation to their kit that basically means that they have almost zero requirement for food. The food requirement is what really cripples the Riftborn. And so, or not, the Riftborn is what really cripples all the other factions from expanding quickly. When you colonize an outpost with any other faction, it starts pulling food from your primary home system, or whatever nearest systems are sending food. And that food resource gets funneled to a new system, but it slows down the growth of your systems. And there's sort of a hard cap at some point where if you're doing too many outposts, it slows down everything else so much, your population growth particularly, that it becomes a problem. It becomes a trade-off, and you actually lose net resources in the long run by expanding too quickly. These guys don't have that problem. And so you saw in the early video, part 1, part 2 of this particular series, we had as many as 3, I think, maybe even 4 outposts accruing industry, but not pulling industry from our home system and building into colonies from outposts. And so the no food requirement allows them to go very wide. That's the number one thing that you need to remember with these guys. And that means in the early game you need to prioritize getting a whole bunch of colony ships built as quickly as possible, because the most important thing that you can do is snag territory as close to the enemy as possible and snatch it up before they get to colonize it, and then basically create a front and kind of box them in and use that to pressure them into the mid game. So being able to grab a bunch of territory, and specifically the best territory, is really important. Another thing that's really important for these guys is, we're going to jump out of here and I'm going to mouse over that. These compression singularities, and to a lesser extent dilation singularities, these are super valuable. And they're a unique structure that only the Riftborn get. And what this really does for your faction, more than anything else, is it gives you a nice 25% boost to all your FIDSI. But then the second thing that it does is it increases the experience on both ships and heroes that are in these systems. And so a couple of things that you can do to really accelerate your gameplay is always run these compression singularities on systems where you're running governors. You can also do it for heroes that are commanders of fleets. If you just park a fleet on one of these systems, they'll get double XP. And this is something that I didn't actually do in my own gameplay, but I think has some merit. If you want to get your fleets very, very powerful, park them on a singularity. Make sure that they're running with a hero that has the bonus XP per turn, and watch those fleets level up. And fleets that are highly leveled up compared to fleets that are coming out vanilla from other factions are going to just decimate. You're going to destroy their ships, even though they're the same tier, even though they may have similar levels of tech. Because you have so many extra levels, that gives you extra bonuses to health, it gives you extra bonuses to accuracy, it gives you extra bonuses to damage, And so your ships are just way more effective. So you can really leverage heroes with the Riftborn better than almost any other faction. Because of your ability to leverage heroes with the Riftborn, one building that we didn't acquire, but I think has some potential merit and should be considered for future investigation, is this building. The Academy Embassy gives you basically heroes at a faster pace, and so you'll unlock heroes much more quickly with this building than any other building. It's a unique structure that can only be built once in the Empire, but because the Riftborn are able to leverage heroes better than most other factions due to the way that they can enhance their experience, both as fleet commanders and as governors, I think you should definitely consider the possibility of grabbing this. There's one other building that helps you leverage heroes. I'm trying to remember where it's at. It's one of the technologies up here. Can't be this high, is it? I can't remember exactly where it's at, but basically it's the technology that allows you to purchase heroes from the galactic market. And so if we go to the marketplace, what is it? Oh, here we go. Impactless sites. Hold control click. Control click. There we go. Okay. So if we mouse over impactless sites, we can see that there it is, marketplace. So it's this one. Opens access to mercenaries and heroes on the marketplace. This would be the other option. And because dust is actually pretty easy for us to acquire, this might even be a better option than the normal embassy building that just generates a hero for free every so often. So those two technologies might hold higher value for me in future playthroughs, because getting heroes can be really, really powerful. Okay, let's move on to the next point that I want to cover. Let's talk a little bit about their ships. So, as with all factions, Riftborn have Tier 1 ships, military ships here, Tier 2 military ships here, and the Tier 3 military ship here. Let's go ahead and let's just jump in here real quick. And let's start with the starting... is it this one? Okay, let's start with the starting ship. So this ship, I like it. This colony ship has a lot of flexible mechanics. The main thing that I like about it is the 4 support modules right from the beginning of the game allow you to run 4 engines and create a very, very effective scout ship. I've used this strategy in a couple of videos now. Creating a couple of really, really fast colony ships or scout ships, whichever one has more support modules, basically, and running them around the galaxy to uncover as much territory in your primary constellation as possible is really, really effective in getting intel, and maybe the most effective way to gather information on what's around you. So having this ship available at turn 1 is really, really useful. You can always retrofit these into something like this and use them to colonize later once they've sort of done all they can do. And there's a number of other uses for these ships. For example, if you do have titanium slugs, you can also outfit them something like this and make this a very cheap but effective sieging fleet that can help lower the defenses of enemy forces. So there's a lot of flexibility here, very, very useful ship design, very, very cheap to construct. One of the things that you can do if your economy is online is you can build the ships without any modules and then retrofit those designs as you see fit. That allows you to get the construction completed very, very quickly and use your dust. If you have a huge stockpiles of dust that you're not using every turn, this is one way to more efficiently take advantage of those resources. Their scout class ship. This ship is less good, but still pretty good. The fact that we have 3 support modules is definitely great. Any ship that has 3 support modules in the early game is going to be pretty valuable. The fact that we have 2 weapon modules actually isn't bad. You can run 2 of the same kind or 2 different kind of weapons. But the 3 support modules really allows you to leverage a fast ship with probes or a slower ship with lots of probes. Both of those things have some value in the game. The colony class ships definitely have more flexibility, but they don't have the ability to run probes. So that's really the only difference, and the only reason that you would want to run this ship over the colony class ship is primarily to get the probes. Probes are going to be pretty helpful in a few circumstances, but as an early game ship, this one also has the ability to run something like a manpower module, and even if you run like a manpower module, a kinetic module, and say like 2 weapons like this, this makes a reasonably decent ship for fighting. The problem is it's very much a glass cannon. You're going to have lower health than other ships. Even scout ships outfitted in a similar fashion, you're just not going to have as much health. So whatever you do, if you do decide to run these as a ship, you're going to want to run the kinetic enhancer, and the extra support modules allow you to do that. But more importantly, you're going to want to run long-range weaponry, and so something like this might actually be more effective, just because the torpedoes are really good at long range, and you want combat to end as quickly as possible. So if you can't beat them at long range with this ship design, you're basically not going to win many engagements. But this is one option that you have for early aggression. But these aren't really the ships you want to be using for early aggression. Let's move on to medium class ships. Medium class ships have a little bit more, and this is the attacker class ship. One of the reasons that I like this ship is it does have 4 weapon slots at this point in the game, which is more than most other ships have, and the extra weapon slots are what allow you to take advantage of missiles. If you only run small numbers of torpedoes, you're not going to be effective, but if you run lots of torpedoes and then you add in a couple of swarm missiles to help limit the effectiveness of flat cannons, you can get a really, really decent and very, very effective ship in some cases. It will take a very well-designed counter ship or counter fleet to stand up to this much firepower. The problem is, if they're able to, because of your lower health than normal ships, you're going to have a rough time. The Rational class ship. This ship, like many of the defensive ships, only has a single module for weapons, which, in my opinion, almost always makes sense to equip with flat cannons, because flat cannons add defenses. And there's just not much to say about it. It's pretty standard. You've got your 2 modules for defense, and 3 support slots that you can use for various different things that we've already discussed. So nothing really interesting here, like with the military ship. We've already talked about these 2. This is where we really get to the meat and potatoes of how their fleets are successful. And because I've upgraded this, you can actually see that we have the extra adamantium tiers unlocked. But look at all the weapon slots on this ship. I mean, this ship has so many guns, it's ridiculous. And this is where, again, heavily loading out with lots of torpedoes can be a huge benefit. Just lots and lots of missiles that overwhelm flak defenses. There aren't many ships in this medium class that can even approach the number of torpedoes that these guys can. And even if you take off those 2 bonus ones, by default you start with 7. So this is just really impressive. The lack of defensive modules means that, again, we're looking at a glass cannon. These are the ships that have to win fights and win fights quickly, or they're going to get heavily damaged or destroyed. But if they do manage to win fights, it's quite spectacular with the number of torpedoes you can add. And then throwing in the occasional swarm missile module can help minimize flak defenses success. So this is what I would do with these types of ships if I were to keep playing this game. This ship, again, tons of support modules, quite a few defense modules. These are pretty standard. The only difference between this and other ships of this nature is that they have lower health, and so they are not going to be as good defensively as other factions' ships of the same variety, but they don't really get anything to compensate for that as far as I can tell. They're not getting significantly more support modules or defense modules than other ships of this class. They're not getting different types of weapon slots, so nothing real exciting here. Just build them however you would build most other faction ships, primarily focusing on soaking as much fire for the enemy as possible, and then using modules like this that repair you between phases to keep them alive. And then they're Big Daddy ships. Again, this class of ship doesn't have anything super unique. There's no extra weapon slots. You know, you start with a fair number of weapon slots slash fighter bomber slots. You start with the big quad weapon on the turret, and nothing else too unique about this ship. You do get veteran pilots for these, which adds damage to your squadrons, and that can be interesting, but squadrons are really weak in the game right now, and I don't find too many uses for them. There are some, and maybe at some point I'll talk about that, but not specifically for Riftborn, so irrelevant to this conversation. So that's basically my rundown of how you use their ships. Even though they're glass cannons, they can be very effective if you kit them with the right weaponry and make use of primarily torpedoes and swarm missiles and overwhelming the flak defenses. Now there are counter plays to that. You can build ships with massive amounts of flak cannons that might be able to survive, and if ships do close into close range with you with flak cannons, they will tear your ships to pieces. So you have to be aware of that and pay attention to what the enemy is building. But that pretty much wraps it up for my review of the ships for the Riftborn. We've talked about the scouting trick and exploration. Let's talk a little bit about what types of planets these guys prefer. So we start on a cold, snowy world, which kind of sucks because cold, snowy world really has no synergy with our faction whatsoever. It's actually very nice that we do get both strategics at the very start of the video, or at the very start of the game. And we got lucky and rolled a second cache over here, which is great, but starting with these is pretty helpful and a good synergy. But what we're really looking for, besides strategics, is hot worlds. The Riftborn love hot worlds, and primarily as we get out into looking for systems that are ideal for us to colonize, this type of a system, because it has a lava planet, became one of the first systems that I think we ended up colonizing. And lava planets in particular are the best system or the best planet type to colonize as the Riftborn, because lava planets have massive amounts of industry to start with. We have no food requirements, so a lot of the penalties are removed for being on lava planets. that you would normally get for being on them with other factions. Because we get extra approval per population pip on sterile worlds, we don't have to worry about the negative approval. Because we don't have food requirements, we don't have to worry about the low food. And because industry helps outposts generate faster into colonies, these are some of the quickest planets that you can turn an outpost into a colony on. Deserts are also very good for this. Arid planets are slightly less good. And then you have things like your jungle planets that can also be okay, but they're not as good. So that's something to keep in mind. Hot planets are the best planets to grab in the system. The other thing that you want to look for, obviously, and all factions do, are endless planets. This isn't actually an endless planet. Or no, it is. Yeah, Veil. So endless planets, like Veil, Veil provides, let's zoom out here. What screen am I looking for? This is what I'm looking for. Veil provides a significant amount of influence. And so grabbing systems that have endless planets can help solve your influence problems, or at least in the early game get you a nice stockpile of influence. They also produce larger borders quicker because of that, and so they can help secure some territory for you, which is very, very nice. But the main thing that you want to do is you want to use those scout ships that we talked about earlier and get out there and look for the best hot systems and the best endless systems near your starting location and prioritize those for colonization. That's going to be really important to getting a good start with the Riftborn, and because you can go wide and because you can go fast, you can snag them before many other factions are able to. Late game, as I pointed out, we're able to largely ignore the over-colonization penalties and overpopulation penalties. They just don't add up to enough to really stop us from rolling. But that does mean that you need to make sure that you spend some time grabbing approval buildings throughout the tech tree, or approval mitigating techs like this one, to keep your systems happy. This was a real big deal for us when we got these. This is one of the techs in the mid to late game that we really needed in order to keep our approval under control while continuing to expand rapidly. Another thing that you can do, and this is something that I've thought about, but I haven't actually considered when the right time to do it is. So at some point, like, Meropir has grown in an influence bubble so large that we have actually completely engulfed Wrath, which means that we don't necessarily need Wrath as a system any longer to keep these planets under our control and to prevent other players from colonizing it. Once your bubble has surrounded a system, other factions are basically unable to colonize in your space. So one of the things you can do is you can actually pick this system up and move it to a new location. And there's a couple of technologies. I think if I go to Impactless Sites, something like that. Is it this one? Yeah, Vacate System. This just gives you a colony ship and a dust bonus that scales with the population and the number of improvements. So you basically cash out everything and then pick it up and move it to a new location. It's probably not worth doing, but because you can generate population so quickly with this faction, it probably doesn't hurt you as much as it would with other factions. And I don't recall if there was one that actually lets you move your entire system. I think that might be something from a different game that I'm thinking about. But that's something that I would consider playing around with at some point. Now, I wouldn't do it on systems like Wrath that have 4 planets, but we ended up with a couple of 2-planet systems like this that are just never going to be all that good. And so these ones, once our bubbles kind of take over, we could definitely pull the population off of these, pull everything off of these, and get them to a system like Gateria, where we like raise this to the ground or something, or Yakima, or any of these other better systems with 4 planets. We might be able to offlift and move those out. And the penalties for a lot of factions, because it takes so long to regrow population, it can be very detrimental to do that, and maybe never a good idea. And even with these guys, it might not be a good idea, but because they recover so quickly from population, due to the high industry output and the way that they build them, it might be worth trying. So that's another minor thing that I would say is a possible suggestion for these guys. Coming back to the early game, and what should you do with these guys in the early game? In the early game, you have a lot of buildings to consider either researching or starting production of. But many times, the total amount of fizzies that you're going to get from constructing a single population point is going to be much more valuable than building a building. And so I wish that this wasn't active because I can't show you as easily. Maybe if I go to like this system, yeah, it's just not going to show up anywhere. The early buildings that you build generally will give you somewhere in the nature of 10 to 30 fidzy output, somewhere in that general number, 10 to 30. But a single population pip, even on your snow world, is going to be producing something like 35. So let's count this up real quick. So we've got 9 and 3 is 12, and 8 is 20. So that's 20 resources per population. But then your individual population each produce, for visual reference, each produce 5. So that's another 15. So that's 35 total fidzy per turn. Now, you could say that it's not quite that, because the Riftborn don't really use food. So if we discount the food, that's still 31. 31 is a lot more total resources that you are using per turn than a lot of the buildings that you can build would give you. And so because of that, I think it makes a lot more sense at many points in the game to strictly focus on just generating lots and lots of population. Then the other thing that actually affects this quite handily is there are a number of buildings in the game that offer you per population bonuses. And so structures like this per population plus 2 science basically per population on this planet, they're not very useful for a lot of factions in the early game. But eventually your populations get so large that it actually becomes relevant. And because of that, you can generate a lot more value from those buildings earlier in the game than a lot of other factions can. And so it opens up a lot of doors in the tech tree as to which buildings you're building and when you get to build them. But per population bonuses definitely are more valuable for the Riftborn than just about any other faction, because no other faction can hit 50 population before turn 50 as regularly as these guys seem to be able to. I just can't grow fast enough in many cases to get systems filled out like these guys do. And that's for two reasons. One, because we can expand wide, and because each outpost slash colony can grow its own population at whatever pace that I want to grow it based on my construction queue. I don't have to wait for food tech and food buildings to do it passively. I basically take control of it and make it happen when I want it to happen. Now, that does come at an opportunity cost. Building population instead of building things like ships or other buildings can cost you, but because their population build very efficiently, it doesn't cost you as much, and in fact often puts you ahead. So I think that you can get away with it. One of the other things about their population that's interesting is generally how you get ahead in the game is you focus exclusively on industry in the early game, and with other factions you also have to focus on food. But because we don't need food, we basically just focus 100% on industry. So that helps us laser focus on industry. So whenever we do deviate from building population, it's to build industry buildings, which helps everything else move faster. But the second part of that actually makes a big difference, and one of the things that I noticed, is because their population produced both science and dust, even if you ignore most of the science and dust buildings in the early game, you passively generate enough science and dust from growing your population that it doesn't really put you behind. And at no point in the game did I ever feel like we were like super struggling for dust, or that we were like really waiting a long time for science to complete. It felt pretty good the entire time. And that is largely to do because I focused on growing population and unlocking these bonuses passively, just in the background, so to speak, which allowed me to keep doing it over and over and over. And that gives you the ability to seriously laser focus on industry. The other reason that growing population helps you laser focus on industry is because at 20 population, you get this very nice permanent 15% boost to all of your systems, which is super good because industry is really all you care about. And then at 50 population, wormhole travel consumes only half of your ship's remaining movement points. This needs to be reworded. This tooltip is wrong. And this is actually slightly more valuable than I originally understood it to be. While the wormhole travel only consumes half of your ship's remaining movement points is true, what this tech really gives you, or what this bonus really gives you, is once you hit 50 population, you get vision of wormholes and you get access to them. This means that you can completely ignore the science technology Hawking Radiation Dowser, because this one reveals wormholes. That's one of the primary effects. It also gives you anomaly reduction and evolved soils, which is pretty useless for us. And then if you're playing with the Penumbra DLC, it gives you an extra hacking operation. We don't need to grab this tech ever as the Riftborn, unless we really, really want anomaly reduction or the hacking. The food is pretty much irrelevant. And this is basically irrelevant once you hit 50 population, which you can do before turn 50. So that's really, really cool. And just to verify or to point out what I'm talking about, you can see right here, even though I don't have that tech, I have vision of wormholes. And I have vision of wormholes, and we have traveled down these wormholes with some of our ships. So we know it works. So that technology, the tooltip is wrong for it. You actually unlock wormhole usage when you hit 50 population, which is awesome. And that's actually really good, because right around turn 50 is where you're going to really want to start to branch out to all the other constellations. And if you are using the kinds of ships that we've been using to uncover the galaxy, you can see we've done a pretty good job of that, and wormholes are allowing us access to more territory and allowing us to scout more effectively than ever. And so the scouting just continues to be very, very impressive with these very high-speed ships, and then the unlocking of wormholes to get off your primary constellation is helpful. So it enhances that quite a bit. So that was a neat little find that is not part of the tooltips that probably should be. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about manpower. Manpower generation with these guys can be difficult. You can see at many times in the game that you're generating 0 or near 0 manpower on systems. If I mouse over my food, and I think it's because our manpower is currently capped at the Empire level, which is why we're not generating any. But basically, we have a hard time generating manpower with this faction. There are 2 ways to resolve that. One way is through fabricated forces, which consumes all of your industry for the turn, but converts 50% of it into manpower. This is something that you generally don't want to be doing very often, but sometimes you need to do it, and specifically you need to do it before you build large fleets. The reason you need to do it before you build large fleets, or as you're building large fleets, is because ships that are lacking their full contingency of manpower actually perform with a penalty, or they lose a bonus, which is roughly the same thing. Ships that have their full manpower get a 20% bonus, I believe, to damage, and ships that do not have manpower obviously don't get that bonus. And so to make your ships most effective, you need to make sure that they have their manpower equipped. The other thing is you're going to need the manpower for invasion forces. These guys are not particularly good at invasion because it's really hard to generate tons of manpower without slowing down some of your other things. One of the ways that I've let's find a system that's actually building something. Here we go. One of the ways that I've sort of gotten around that is, instead of running this for a full turn, what you can do is you can stack it behind a building that you're currently working on. And what will happen is, when that building finishes its construction, a portion of the industry will roll over into fabricated forces, and it will give you the appropriate amount of manpower for that. And so it sort of trickles manpower into your queue. This is very micro intensive and not something that I would generally recommend doing unless you're just a glutton for punishment, but it's one way to kind of trickle manpower in without consuming entire turns of industry. You do consume industry, but you're not consuming your entire turn's worth, and so you're still able to sort of split the difference in getting things done and completely stalling your system's growth for a little bit of manpower. So that's one way that you can do it. The other way that you can do it, if you do end up building this building, is you can run the chain gang program. The chain gang program is generally not going to be a good idea, but particularly in your systems that do have minor civilizations, you can use the chain gang to sort of cull out the ones that you're not really interested in keeping. And so whenever you see a particular population that, say, you're not really interested, like this Kelgaroo, we don't really care for Kelgaroos. They don't really benefit us all that much. Maybe we feel that way. If Kelgaroos ever pop up as the next population to grow naturally through food, you can run Chain Gang to eliminate a Kelgaroo, and that will actually remove them potentially from the system so that they no longer grow for you, which can be nice if you don't want them growing in that system. And it will give you a pretty reasonable amount of manpower. It does come at the cost of a population pip, though, and so you got to weigh the value of doing that versus not. The thing that it does do, though, is it provides you another population pip for Riftborn, which are some of the best population pips in the game, and maybe the best population pip in the game. And so there is a case to be made that getting rid of all of these at some point and replacing them all with Riftborn would actually, in a long enough timeline, give us more resources. Even though we would be down for a short period of time as we culled them out, we would get more because Riftborn just produce so much more and also don't have the limitations of food and some of these other things. So using Chain Gang to help customize your systems a little bit can be useful and can also solve your manpower needs. Let's see. The next thing, and we've already briefly touched on it, but if you are going to start aggressively using military, this technology is really important. Titanium A2S slugs and using the sieging mechanic to reduce the enemy manpower to a small enough number that you can manage it in one turn with the whatever portion that you've allocated to your ships is really good idea. You don't want to get in long, prolonged battles where you're losing manpower through invasions, because it takes away from all of the good stuff you're generating on your systems in terms of industry and buildings and other resources. And taking time out of their queue to generate manpower instead of doing it passively through food like other factions do is not something you want to be doing very often. So while this might take a little more time to siege down systems, it's generally worth it because you expand so quickly anyways that grabbing systems more quickly with military can often put you up against approval penalties. So take your time and do it right. Use the titanium slugs in combination with mobile energy weapons and maximize your invasion forces. The mobile energy weapons are particularly effective against pirates because pirates never get anything besides base infantry, and we can see that armor is very effective against base infantry. And so once you get a hold of these, pirates become a non-factor, which is really nice. Again, to get that technology unlocked, it does cost manpower, and so using some of those manpower tricks we just talked about can be very helpful. Alright, what are the last few things on my list here? One thing that we didn't do that I've heard of being done, but haven't tried in this game and haven't tried in any games, is you can actually create a single system whose sole purpose is to generate and export Riftborn population. And the way that you would do that is you would pick generally a bad system for Riftborn. This might not be a good example. This one. This would be a perfect example. You would pick a system that would generally be bad for Riftborn, that's not particularly good. This system would be actually a prime candidate for that. And what we would do is we would use this level 2 modernization tech to unlock spaceports. Once spaceports are unlocked, we would start transferring all of our minor civs to these planets. Now, minor civs tend to thrive on planets with reasonable amounts of food and temperate conditions, And so we would move all of our minor civilization population to this system. And then we would queue up a single Riftborn population. And one of the things about Riftborn population is that each one that gets constructed on a system makes the next one cost a little bit more. So the very first Riftborn population that we produce on this will basically cost like 50 industry and will be done in one turn. And as that one gets completed, we will immediately move it to the spaceport and ship it to one of our other Riftborn planets. And then we will just continually ship that one population of Riftborn and continually move all minor civs to this planet, who will passively fill up all of the system. That also means that this is the only system where we have to worry about food production. And so in this system, we can build the handful of food production buildings that we might have available to us, but we don't have to worry about building them in systems like this, where they're not very valuable, because Riftborn don't really benefit from food. In this case, we did build them in some of these other systems because we were trying to keep our minor population from starving off. And that might not be the best way to handle that. What might be a better way is sort of get this set up early, find a system that is ideal for this, sort of like this system here, and then get your modernization tech and start using your spaceports to move populations around. And then this just becomes a Riftborn generating facility, essentially. I don't know whether the opportunity costs of building that in the early game makes sense, but it's something that I've heard other players have done successfully, and so it's something to investigate in the future. Moving all of your minor civs to a single location can be a possible solution to freeing up more space for your Riftborn, while also generating more Riftborn for the rest of your systems. That pretty much wraps it up. That's all the notes that I have that I wanted to cover. So hopefully this little overview is a, brief video. I say brief, it's 1 hour long. It's half as long as my normal videos. But just a brief overview of how I see the Riftborn being played successfully, and some of the things that you can do to improve your own Riftborn gameplay. I'm going to try to do one of these videos for some of the other factions. Probably do one for the Vaulters, probably do one for Horatio, and then we'll see if I can come up with one for the Hishu. If you haven't seen my new Hishu series, please check that out. I just recently started playing with them, and we'll continue that series for a couple of playthroughs, and we'll see how far we get into understanding and better utilizing their unique flavor mechanics. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this one today. I hope that this was helpful to you guys. And if you have any other tips, tricks, or interesting things that you want to point out about my thoughts or the Riftborn specifically, please add them to the comment section. And this has been TheNosePlays. You guys have a great day.